shadows of arrogance. The grand chamber of the Galactic Council thrummed with an energy that was both palpable and suffocating. Over 300 species from across the galaxy filled the vast hall, their bodies shimmering under the cool light of the quantum crystal doors that stood sealed behind them. No pomp, no rituals, not even the 17-minute harmonic meditation that once marked the beginning of every session. The absence of formality screamed louder than any siren. At the heart of it all, Ambassador Zix slithered toward the central podium. His chromatic scales oscillated nervously between green and gray. His sensory tendrils twitched, overwhelmed by the cocktail of stress pheromones permeating the air. The scent of fear was everywhere, though Zix lacked a traditional nose, not that he needed one. "Order! Order in the chamber!" boomed the voice of High Counselor Vree. Her bioluminescent patches flared a warning shade of purple as she gazed across the nervous assembly. The room fell into a strained silence, save for the faint sound of someone in the back stress molting. Zix allowed himself a moment to compose his thoughts, though his scales rippled with barely concealed dread. He knew how important this meeting was. He knew why they had gathered. "Esteemed representatives," Zix began, his universal translator flickering to life, casting his words into the 742 recognized languages of the council. His voice, calm but strained, echoed through the chamber. "We are gathered here today because we made a grave miscalculation, and when I say grave, I mean the kind of error that makes installing a quantum drive backwards look like child's play." A nervous titter rippled through the crowd. Ambassador Khalees of the Aegean Collective, one of their 17 eyes blinking in perfect sync, raised a thin, quivering appendage. "Surely it cannot be as catastrophic as the great miscalculation of cycle 470392? Zix's scales flashed crimson, his tendrils curling in agitation. "Oh, it's worse, much worse." He paused, allowing his words to settle into the room's tense air. "Remember how we all thought humanity was amusing? Primitive bipeds squabbling over frozen dairy topped with carbon crystals? The ones who hadn't even mastered telepathic communication yet?" The murmurs grew louder, more frantic. A Flaxian diplomat liquefied partially in their seat, their anxiety overwhelming their molecular cohesion. "Well," Zix said, leaning forward, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried to every ear, "it turns out we catastrophically underestimated them, and by we, I mean primarily the Kraken Empire." His tendrils flicked toward the holographic display flickering behind him, showing the ominous outline of Earth and its surrounding colonies. "May their molecules rest in peace." A heavy silence followed. High Counselor Vree shifted to a deep magenta, her glowing patches dimming. "Ambassador Zix, for those who were absent during the incident, please elaborate." Zix's scales rippled again, this time in what could only be described as the chromatic equivalent of a grim laugh. "How much time do we have? Because this story makes the Void Wars look like a petty argument over parking in the Horsehead Nebula." The display zoomed in on 3 human colonies: New Providence, Arcturus Prime, and Horizon's Edge. It started with a probe, a small, harmless test. The Kraken Empire wanted to assess humanity's defenses. "You know, just a little incursion, nothing major. What's the worst that could happen?" Zix's voice dripped with sarcasm. In the distance, a quantum spanner clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the silence. "What indeed?" Zix muttered, his scales shifting to a grim blue-gray. "The Kraken fleet sent 12 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, and 200 auxiliary craft. They expected a swift surrender. Instead..." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. Every eye, tendril, and sensory appendage was locked onto him. "Instead," he said slowly, "they found out why humans don't think outside the box. They destroy the box, then rebuild it as a weapon, and then they ask you if you want to see what else they can make with basic geometry." The chamber was deathly silent. Even the stress molting had stopped. "They struck New Providence first," Zix continued, expecting fear. "They found defiance. The humans evacuated their civilians in less than 4 hours. 4 hours. The Kraken didn't realize what they were dealing with until it was too late." He gestured again, and the holographic display flickered, revealing a harrowing image, a human fleet materializing in orbit, their ships angular, functional, and utterly terrifying in their brutal simplicity. But it wasn't just their ships, it was everything. His scales darkened, their tactics, their ruthlessness, their resilience. By the time the Kraken realized they were not the predators but the prey, 3 of their dreadnoughts had already fallen. And the humans? Zix's scales pulsed with a cold, dark gray. They didn't even flinch. The display shifted to a final image, a human officer standing aboard a damaged vessel, his face bloodied, his eyes fierce. Beneath him, the banner read, "Surrender is not an option." Zix turned back to the silent chamber. Shall I continue? Or have we all learned enough to understand why Protocol 47B, don't even think about it, now exists? The chamber remained still, the weight of the story pressing down on every being present. This was only the beginning. The first strike, the chamber remained deathly silent. Every representative sat frozen, their collective fear palpable, but none dared interrupt Ambassador Zix. He flicked a tendril toward the holographic display, his scales darkening into a somber black. They struck New Providence first, Zix resumed, his voice calm but heavy with tension. The Kraken believed the human colony would be an easy victory. After all, it was an agricultural world, lightly defended with rudimentary orbital defenses, perfect for a quick show of force. The hologram shifted, showing a serene planet, lush with green fields and scattered cities. Then came the attack. Kraken dreadnoughts descended like shadows, their energy cannons ripping through orbital platforms and defense satellites in minutes. Explosions bloomed across the sky. Cities burned. But the humans, they didn't cower. They didn't even hesitate. Within 2 hours of the Kraken fleet's arrival, Zix continued, human civilians, farmers, engineers, families had turned their own evacuation ships into makeshift weapons. They used automated farming drones to sow chaos, not crops. They reprogrammed mining lasers to cut through Kraken hulls. Entire fields were rigged with EMP pulses, disabling Kraken ground forces the moment they touched down. He paused, his tendrils curling with tension. And that was only the beginning. High Counselor Vria's bioluminescent patches flickered a nervous yellow. What happened next? Zix gestured to the hologram. The Kraken sent ground forces to secure key population centers. They expected resistance, sure, but not what they found. The display zoomed in on a small human settlement. The streets were eerily quiet, the buildings intact. Kraken soldiers, hulking, armored creatures with crystalline exoskeletons, marched in formation. They scanned the area with precision. No signs of life. By Kraken standards, it was a textbook occupation, Zix said grimly. Until their first patrol vanished. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Zix's tendrils trembled, his scales shifting into a deep, anxious green. The humans didn't confront them head-on. They lured them in. Small, isolated groups disappeared into the dense forests, led by human scouts with neural implants for tracking. Kraken soldiers, despite their technological superiority, were hunted. He flicked his tendril again. The holographic display shifted to show a dense forest on New Providence. Audio logs began to play, metallic, crackling, desperate. Patrol 6, reporting movement in the eastern quadrant. They're using primitive weapons, but precision is impossible. Targeting patterns. A loud crash. Static. Then a single word, spoken in the guttural tones of the Kraken commander. Ambush. Silence. The humans used their environment, their ingenuity, Zix said. They combined guerrilla tactics with advanced hacking. They jammed communications, turned Kraken's own war machines against them, and isolated entire units one by one. His scales shimmered. The Kraken fleet above watched helplessly as their ground forces were dismantled. Counselor Vria's patches flared purple again. Surely the Kraken retaliated. Their dreadnoughts? Zix gave a grim nod. Oh, they retaliated. Hard. The hologram shifted once more, showing the human fleet arriving from the nearby system of Horizon's Edge. The ships were patchwork by Galactic standards, uneven hulls, exposed weaponry, but they were fast. Faster than the Kraken anticipated. And this, Zix said, his voice tight, is where humanity truly revealed itself. The display showed a human vessel, the UNSF Resolute, leading a formation of smaller frigates and corvettes. A massive Kraken dreadnought loomed over them, its weapons charging. But the Resolute didn't retreat. Instead, it charged forward, closing the distance faster than the Kraken could react. In any other engagement, Zix explained, this would have been suicidal. But the humans, they weren't retreating. They were baiting them. The display zoomed in, showing a sudden ripple across the human fleet as they released waves of electronic pulses. The dreadnought's weapons flickered, then powered down entirely. They hacked the dreadnought systems mid-battle, Zix said, his voice laced with awe. And then, well, let's just say the Resolute didn't need traditional weaponry after that. The chamber watched as the human ship rammed the dreadnought head-on. A massive explosion followed, but as the smoke cleared, the remaining human ships were still operational. The dreadnought was gone. Vaporized. The humans sacrificed one ship, Zix concluded, to take out a fleet's command vessel. No surrender. No hesitation. Just raw, calculated defiance. A silence fell over the chamber once more. Even the most hardened diplomats looked shaken. High Counselor Vri finally spoke, her voice soft. And the other two colonies? Arcturus Prime? Horizon's Edge? Zix's scales turned a grim gray. We'll get to those, but not before you understand one thing. New Providence wasn't just a victory. It was a warning. He leaned forward, his tendrils pointing toward the council. Humanity doesn't fight wars. They survive them. They don't conquer. They endure. And by the time the Kraken realized this, it was already too late. The fall of Arcturus Prime. The silence in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was oppressive. Every delegate remained frozen, their eyes and sensory appendages locked on Ambassador Zix. His scales now shimmered in a grim gray, reflecting the gravity of the story. High Counselor Vria's bioluminescent patches dimmed to a subdued blue. Ambassador Zix. New Providence was only the first colony. What happened at Arcturus Prime? A ripple of anxiety coursed through the chamber. Zix inhaled deeply through his tendrils, his chromatophores flickering in muted shades of green and black. Arcturus Prime, he began, was different. Unlike New Providence, it was a strategic military hub. Human starship production yards, weapon testing facilities, and orbital defense platforms were all stationed there. The Kraken believed that if they could crush Arcturus Prime, humanity would lose its war machine. He gestured toward the holographic display, which shifted to show Arcturus Prime. The planet's surface was covered with massive military installations, its orbit teeming with shipyards and defensive satellites. The star in the background cast a reddish glow over the planet, making it appear as though it was already burning. The Kraken sent their second fleet. Zix continued. This was not a scouting mission. They came to annihilate 30 dreadnoughts, 60 cruisers, hundreds of smaller craft. Their mission, total planetary destruction. A collective shudder passed through the council. 30 dreadnoughts. It was a force capable of reducing entire civilizations to dust. At first, things seemed predictable, Zix said, his voice steady but ominous. The Kraken engaged from orbit, bombarding Arcturus Prime's defenses. Orbital platforms fell one by one. Shipyards exploded. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned. He paused, his tendrils curling, but they weren't outmaneuvered. The hologram flickered, showing the initial stages of the battle. Kraken ships descended in precise formations, their plasma cannons reducing entire swaths of the human defensive network to molten wreckage. Yet amidst the chaos, the human fleet remained coordinated, retreating strategically, their movements calculated. Humanity wasn't retreating in fear, Zix explained. They were setting a trap, and the Kraken, arrogant in their superiority, walked right into it. The display zoomed in on a series of orbital facilities that appeared abandoned. The Kraken dreadnoughts moved in, expecting to claim them with ease. Suddenly, a holographic projection showed the human shipyards powering up not as production centers, but as weapons. Every shipyard, every abandoned station, Zix said, his voice thick with tension, was rigged with experimental gravitonic pulse cannons. The humans lured the Kraken fleet into close orbit, and then they unleashed hell. The display erupted in brilliant light as pulse cannons fired, ripping through the Kraken fleet with devastating precision. Entire dreadnoughts were torn apart in seconds, their remains spiraling into the planet's atmosphere, burning up like falling stars. High Counselor Vries Patches pulsed in shock. They used their own shipyards as a trap? Zix nodded grimly. Human engineers converted production facilities into weapons in less than 6 hours. When the Kraken realized what was happening, half their fleet was already gone. Their command structure collapsed. Desperation set in. He gestured again, and the holographic display shifted to a chaotic scene. Human ships, smaller and faster, weaving between the Kraken vessels, launching precision strikes. Their tactics were ruthless, coordinated, relentless. The Kraken fleet tried to retreat. Zix continued, but the humans had predicted this. They activated a planetary gravity well generator, preventing any form of warp escape. The Kraken were trapped. One by one, their ships fell. The display lingered on the burning remains of the Kraken dreadnoughts, debris scattering across Arcturus Prime's orbit. "What happened to the survivors?" asked a voice from the back of the chamber. Trembling, it was the Mercurian delegate, his crystalline form flickering with anxiety. Zix's scales shifted to a deep, mournful black. "There were no survivors," he said quietly. "The humans didn't leave anything to chance. No surrender, no prisoners. The Kraken's second fleet was erased." A heavy, suffocating silence descended over the chamber. The message was clear. Zix concluded, his voice low but resolute. Humanity would not be conquered. They would not be subdued. And if you tried, they would ensure that you never tried again. High Counselor Vries Patches flared a deep crimson, signaling both urgency and dread. And the Kraken response? Zix's scales rippled again, this time with a strange mix of dark amusement and apprehension. They sent their entire remaining fleet to Horizon's Edge, believing it to be humanity's last hope. They didn't realize it would be their graveyard. The chamber remained frozen, the gravity of the situation sinking into every delegate present. None dared speak. Zix took a slow breath. "And now, we come to Horizon's Edge. Shall I continue?" The final stand at Horizon's Edge. The chamber hung in unbearable silence, every delegate leaning in, transfixed by the horrifying revelations. Ambassador Zix paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink deeper into the assembly. His scales shimmered a murky gray, reflecting the grave atmosphere. "Horizon's Edge," Zix began, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. The Kraken believed it to be a final, desperate human bastion, a remote colony world, situated near the outer rim of the Orion Spur, a strategic outpost, isolated, vulnerable, or so they thought. He flicked a tendril toward the holographic display, which now revealed Horizon's Edge, a world of vast plains, jagged mountain ranges, and sprawling starports. From orbit, it looked like a frontier colony, simple and unassuming. Beneath that facade, however, was something far more dangerous. The Kraken High Command committed everything to this final assault. Zix continued, their third and final fleet, 50 dreadnoughts, 90 cruisers, and over 500 support ships. It was the largest force they had ever assembled. His scales darkened. They believed overwhelming force would finally break humanity's resolve. What they didn't realize was that humanity had no intention of defending Horizon's Edge. The chamber erupted in murmurs of confusion. High Counselor Vries' bioluminescent patches flared in concern. "What do you mean, Ambassador? If they weren't defending it, then..." "They weren't defending it," Zix interrupted, his tendrils curling with tension. "They were waiting." A holographic display zoomed in on the planet's surface, showing seemingly empty starports, abandoned military installations, and quiet cities. To the Kraken, it appeared that humanity had evacuated in fear. They took the bait. The Kraken fleet descended into low orbit, Zix explained. Their troops landed across key population centers. They met no resistance, No human soldiers, no automated defenses, nothing but eerie silence. The display shifted to a Kraken landing site, their towering crystalline forms marching through empty streets. Their commanders issued orders to seize control of vital infrastructure. Then, they received their first and final communication from humanity. Zix's tendrils flicked, triggering an audio recording. To the Kraken High Command, a calm, human voice echoed through the chamber. You are trespassing on sovereign human territory. You have 30 seconds to retreat or face annihilation. A low, rumbling laughter spread through the Kraken ranks in the recording. They ignored the warning. The timer began to count down. Zix's scales shimmered with a grim hue as he narrated. The Kraken assumed it was a bluff. After all, they had decimated New Providence and Arcturus Prime. They believed humanity had nothing left. What they failed to realize was that humanity had lured them into their final trap. The humans had turned Horizon's Edge into a planet-sized weapon, Zix said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Beneath its surface, they had installed a network of gravitonic imploders, devices capable of generating controlled singularities. Horizon's Edge wasn't a colony, it was a trigger. The holographic display shifted again, showing a sudden pulse from deep within the planet's crust. Kraken ships in orbit faltered, their systems overwhelmed by massive gravitational disruptions. And then, Zix whispered, humanity pulled the trigger. The chamber gasped as the display erupted into chaos. Gigantic fissures split the planet's surface as gravitonic imploders activated in unison. Enormous singularities formed above the planet, consuming everything in their wake. Kraken dreadnoughts were torn apart, their remains dragged into swirling voids. Entire cruisers vanished in seconds. The once dominant fleet was reduced to fragments within moments. High Counselor Vries Patches flared a horrified red. They destroyed their own planet? Zix nodded solemnly. They sacrificed Horizon's Edge to ensure no Kraken ship survived. The singularities destabilized the entire system, collapsing spacetime in the immediate sector. Nothing escaped, not the Kraken fleet, not even the wreckage. It was as if they had never existed. The chamber fell into a stunned silence. They called it Operation Horizon's End. Zix continued, his voice thick with respect. A desperate, ruthless act, but one that ensured humanity's survival. They sent a message the entire galaxy could understand: we will not be conquered. The holographic display faded, leaving only the cold, dark emptiness of space. Zix turned back to the assembled delegates, his scales a somber blue-gray. And that, he said softly, is why Protocol 47B exists, why we must never provoke humanity again. They have shown us what they are willing to do to survive. And now, we must ask ourselves, can we afford to make the same mistake? For a long, agonizing moment, the chamber remained still. Then, slowly, one by one, the representatives nodded in silent agreement. High Counselor Vries Patches dimmed to a calm but grave purple. Let it be known, she declared, that this council will respect the memory of Horizon's Edge. Humanity's warning has been heard. Zix stepped back from the podium, his scales finally settling into a steady, neutral silver. He had delivered the message, and judging by the heavy silence in the room, it was a message no species would ever forget. The cost of victory. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council remained heavy with silence long after Ambassador Zix finished speaking. His words hung in the air like a storm cloud, dark and foreboding. Each delegate wrestled with the implications, their thoughts clouded by fear and awe. Humanity's ruthless ingenuity had become a stark reminder of what desperation could unleash. Finally, High Counselor Vri broke the silence, her bioluminescent patches flickering between purple and crimson. The Kraken Empire is gone, she said, her voice steady but hollow. Their fleets destroyed, their leaders obliterated. But at what cost? Humanity annihilated an entire system. We must ask ourselves, can they be trusted to wield such power responsibly? A murmuring wave rippled through the assembly. Some nodded in agreement, others hesitated, their expressions conflicted. Ambassador Zix, his scales shifting to a neutral silver, stepped forward again. With respect, High Counselor, we cannot afford to see humanity as a mere threat. They did not act out of conquest, they acted out of survival. We underestimated them, provoked them, and now we see the result. What we must ask is, can we risk not trusting them? A representative from the Treller Collective, a species known for their cautious diplomacy, raised a tendril. If humanity continues to grow unchecked, they may soon dominate this council. Their technological advancements are accelerating at an alarming rate. What if they decide they no longer need us? Zix's scales darkened slightly, but he remained composed. Humans are builders, not destroyers. Every war they fought was forced upon them. They have no desire for galactic dominance, they seek only peace. But, he paused, his tendrils curling slightly, if we treat them as enemies, they will respond accordingly, and we have seen what that looks like. The Treller representative hesitated, then lowered their tendril. High Counselor Vries Patches pulsed a thoughtful blue. Perhaps the time has come to change how we view humanity, not as outsiders, not as a threat, but as equals. She turned to the assembled delegates. I propose we extend full membership to humanity within the Galactic Council. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Membership was no trivial matter. It meant granting humanity equal voice, equal power, and, most importantly, access to technologies and resources shared only among council members. The Mercurian delegates stood, their crystalline form shimmering nervously. And if they refuse? Or worse, if they see this as weakness? Zix's tendrils flicked sharply. They won't. Humanity respects strength, but they value diplomacy. Offer them partnership, and they will reciprocate. Continue to fear them, and we risk pushing them into isolation, or worse, conflict. The chamber fell silent again, the weight of the decision pressing down on every delegate. High Counselor Vries surveyed the room, her gaze intense. All in favor of extending membership to humanity, raise your markers. Slowly, hesitantly at first, one by one, markers began to rise. The Treller, the Mercurians, the Aegean Collective, even the Flaxian diplomat, though still partially liquefied, raised their appendage. When the final marker was lifted, High Counselor Vries nodded. The motion passes. Humanity will be offered full membership in the Galactic Council. A soft murmur of relief swept through the room, though it was tinged with apprehension. Zix's scales shifted to a calm green. You've made the right decision. Humanity will honor this, and perhaps now, we can all begin to heal. Epilogue: The dawn of a new era. 2 cycles later, Earth's representative stood before the Galactic Council for the first time. Ambassador Elise Carter, a woman of sharp intellect and unwavering resolve, gazed across the chamber. She spoke with clarity, her voice firm yet diplomatic. We thank the Council for this invitation. Humanity has faced dark times, but we stand here today not as conquerors, but as partners. Let us move forward together. The chamber erupted in applause, a sound that echoed across the galaxy. In the shadows, Zix watched with a satisfied gleam in his eyes. He knew this was only the beginning. Humanity had proven its strength. Now, it would prove its wisdom, and the galaxy, once fractured by fear, would learn to unite under a new banner, one forged in resilience and tempered by hope. The end.